even if the burning of the American flag sends a different message, it's still a message. It's a political message. And therefore, no matter how uniquely provocative it is, it's still a protected mode of expression by the First Amendment. That's precisely why it's guaranteed and protected, because it's expressing ideas.
So recently, Glenn Greenwald blasts Trump's recent decision to sign an executive order banning flag burning. He gets into how the Trump administration's trying to justify this, how much of an attack on free speech this is, and what are the repercussions. Is Trump going to get away with this? Let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
The conservative movement under Donald Trump spent the last decade waving the flag of free speech, a cause very important to me, and often did so with very valid reasons. There were all sorts of systemic attacks on free speech under the Biden administration, under various institutions opposed to Donald Trump, almost all of which, if not all of which, we spent a great deal of time documenting, reporting on, denouncing. And part of the pledge of the Trump administration and the Trump movement was, we're going to win the 2024 election and we're going to restore free speech in America. And ever since then, there's been one assault on free speech after the next, on college campuses, imposing hate speech codes on American students and American faculty who criticize Israel, deporting people because they criticize Israel, protest against Israel, but no other country. And on and on. We've documented all of those as well. This may be the most blatant one of all. There's been decades of politicians who want to demagogue by saying the burning of the American flag is repugnant and repulsive, and therefore it should be a crime. Hillary Clinton advocated that when she was getting ready to run for president. It's a favorite of political demagogues. Because obviously, if you're a citizen of a country and you pledge allegiance to the flag, and the flag is the representative of your country, most people are going to be enraged and disgusted watching somebody else burn that flag. That's normal. It's a normal reaction. But the whole idea of the free speech guarantee in the First Amendment is that it protects not the views that most people are comfortable with or like or tepid about, but the views that you most hate, the views that anger you and disgust you most. That's where free speech protections are needed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's easy to defend speech that you like, but not to defend speech that's most controversial, especially in the time in which it's most controversial. And Glenn's exactly right. The Trump administration and the Trump campaign in many ways was based on the idea that Trump would bring a new semblance of free speech into the White House that had been denied by the Biden administration. And there was a lot of evidence on his side in that regard. Just on the eve of the election, people like AOC and Walz and Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, all five of those people in just a small span of days came out saying we need to do more to police speech on the internet. They were openly saying this at the end of the campaign. Also, we know from the Twitter files revelations that the United States government operated in collaboration with social media agents to censor speech that they didn't like, to remove specific users. You saw actual emails come out showing this. So Glenn's totally right. There was a wave of suppression of free speech, and a lot of people that got behind Trump were doing it on the basis that he was talking better in that regard when it came to our civil liberties, maybe our most important civil liberty.
And burning an American flag in and of itself is an expressive act. It conveys ideas. And therefore, the Supreme Court has been very clear that it can never be criminalized. Now, it doesn't mean that every act of burning a flag is immune from being prosecuted. For example, if you go and burn a flag with the intention of setting someone's house on fire, the fact that you burned a flag as the initiating cause of the fire doesn't immunize that act from being prosecuted, because you're using it to burn it down. If you go and steal somebody's flag, you climb up on their roof and you steal their flag, and then you go on their property and you burn it, either to endanger them or to scare them. You don't have the right to steal somebody else's property. You don't have the right to burn someone else's property. You don't have the right to burn it in a way that will cause them damage or put them in damage or in harm's way, or to deliberately intimidate them on their own property. That, of course, can also be prosecuted. But the
Yeah, that's vandalism or destruction of property. That's a lot different when you own the flag and are making the decisions about how you destroy it. It's totally different from stealing someone else's property.
Act of burning the flag itself is protected expressive speech and therefore cannot be prosecuted. And yet, President Trump today signed an executive order, and it was written, it's a ban on burning the American flag, but it's written with the understanding that the Supreme Court has already said you cannot ban the burning of the American flag. So it's basically a long list of justifications for why it's okay and when it's okay to criminalize the burning of the flag, when the Attorney General is required to go and investigate that, or state authorities are required to go and investigate it, trying to create a bunch of theories about why and when the burning of the American flag is so likely to lead to or incite violence that inherently it must be criminal. It's just an obvious attempt to dance around what the Supreme Court has long said is a core First Amendment right, not a very convincing or adept one either. My guess is the Supreme Court would very quickly deem this unconstitutional, especially as it's applied. But it's the sort of thing that you do when you're trying to distract attention from your supporters, like dumb red meat that you feed to dumb supporters. Like, I know you're still mad about that Epstein thing, but look here, we're banning the burning of the American flag. You love America, you hate the burning of the American flag, so we're banning it.
Yeah, that's great red meat, I guess, to a subsection of Trump's base. How pathetic is that that's what they're getting instead of the Epstein files, this new encroachment on our civil liberties? And look, Glenn's exactly right here. And there's another angle, too. Not only is this protected under the First Amendment, which is really a prohibition on the powers of Congress, because the Anti-Federalists wanted to add the Bill of Rights, because the Federalists, during ratification, said, hey, we don't essentially need a Bill of Rights because this document's only based on enumerated powers, and Congress doesn't have the power to, say, in this case, ban the American flag, so we don't need more. Well, the Anti-Federalists were like, no, we won't take those reassurances on face value. We need this spelled out that you won't encroach in these several traditional areas that were safeguards of civil liberties throughout the annals of British history that the founders were influenced by, because the English had a Bill of Rights. It enacted that in 1689 after the Glorious Revolution. But it's not just that. It's also that the president doesn't have the power to usurp the powers of Congress. The Constitution divests all legislative authority to Congress under Article 1, Section 1. And when the president just tries to circumnavigate that legislative process through issuing edicts like a king, this is more powerful than 17th and 18th century monarchs in Europe, by the way. And they've been acting deferential toward the president in this regard for so long. But that's another angle through which they should attack this, and the states should raise as reasons to nullify it, not let the feds enforce this or carry it out in their own territories.
It's an idiot. It's idiot theater. It does nothing other than attack, ironically, the core defining values of America in the name of honoring and venerating America. Here's the executive order title, Prosecuting the Burning of the American Flag. So in case anybody wants to say, as I've already heard, oh, you haven't read the executive order, it doesn't really prosecute the burning of the American flag. The title of the executive order is Prosecuting the Burning of the American Flag. Can it be any clearer for you? What is the purpose that they chose?
Yeah, they don't leave much to the imagination here, that's for sure.
To describe this executive order, in their words, prosecuting the burning of the American flag. Quote, by the authority vested in me by as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered our great American flag is the most sacred and cherished symbol of the United States of America and of American freedom, identity, and strength. You know what? I don't agree with that statement. I don't agree that the American flag is the most sacred and cherished symbol of the United States. Nor do I agree that it is the most cherished symbol of American freedom, identity, and strength. I think that would be the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence, not the flag. The flag symbolizes the country. These rights that are being attacked is what makes the country worth loving, worth venerating.
Yeah, I'm with Glenn, too. If you compare the two, it seems like the Constitution's more important. At least that provides the structural underpinnings of what this government is supposed to be. It's way off the rails compared to what it was supposed to be. But Glenn's right, too. And I can see a case where someone would look that way, would look at the flag as a more important and cherished symbol. But at the same time, Glenn's right here, if you ask me.
Worth having loyalty to. So in the name of protecting the flag, they're assaulting what actually are the most sacred and cherished values and symbols of American freedom, identity, and strength, which are the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. This executive order goes on, quote, over nearly 2.5 centuries, many thousands of American patriots have fought, bled, and died to keep the stars and stripes waving proudly. It's funny, if you listen to invoking the troops here as a justification for violating the Constitution is repugnant, because if you listen to most troops about why they believe they're going to war and why when they come back, why they talk about, to the extent that they are proud of what they did, and they're often not proud of what they did, but often they are. I don't ever hear them saying, I did it to protect the American flag from being burned. I hear them saying, I did it to protect the freedoms our country offers, the freedom that our country guarantees, the freedoms that we were all raised to respect.
Yeah, a lot of them also say they fought for their brothers in arms in the battle, on the battlefield. That's a common, refrain too amongst a lot of soldiers that I know of that have come back from overseas serving in armed conflicts. But it's also true that a lot of people that burn the flag, sometimes it represents hatred toward a country in general. Sometimes it's hatred toward the current government within that country. It certainly is used that way when people burn, say, Russian flags. When you were a Putin stooge if you didn't burn a Russian flag. But we're supposed to believe that the American flag, never represents opposition to government. Not this one. It just represents the country. And for many people it does, but in many people, protesting other countries involves burning that flag too, when it pertains just to that country's government.
Not the flag itself, but the values and the rights that it represents. Trump goes on, the American flag is a special symbol in our national life that should unite and represent all Americans of every background and walk of life. Desecrating it is uniquely offensive and provocative. It is a statement of contempt, hostility, and violence against our nation. Let me stop there. I agree. Can we just go back a little? I agree with Trump when he says, and by the way, the Supreme Court does too, that desecrating the American flag is uniquely offensive and provocative. I agree with that. And I also agree that it is often, let's even say usually, a statement of contempt, hostility, and violence against our nation.
Yeah, and by the way, it's legal to do things that are uniquely offensive and provocative to others. By the way, that's legal in the United States. If it wasn't legal, no one would be able to have any kind of political show on YouTube, for instance, or type into Twitter a tweet that they're going to send out. A lot of tweets are designed to be intentionally offensive and provocative. It's a statement of contempt, hostility, and violence against our nation. That I don't know about. I don't know if I even agree with Glenn here, if he thinks it's a statement of violence against our nation to burn an inanimate object that many people associate with our country. That is not a violent act. No one's rights are being infringed by you doing that. Maybe some people will interpret that as such. But that's not my problem. If I want to do that with my property, would I trade my labor to acquire?
That's precisely why it's guaranteed and protected, because it's expressing ideas. It's intended to be offensive and provocative. That's what radical speech does. It offends and it provokes. That's the speech that the First Amendment, above all else, protects from being criminalized. And Trump is saying that what he wants to ban is a statement of contempt and hostility toward our nation. You're allowed to express contempt and hostility toward the nation. Trump ran on a platform of saying America is disgusting, it's broken, it's filthy, it's decadent, and he wants to return it to some prior glory. He constantly mined the country. Politicians have the right to do that. Everybody has the right to do that. That's an opinion. It's an expression of belief.
Yeah, that's the American way. I love that Glenn is bringing this point up, that much of Trump's populist platform was based upon the fact that the elites had sold us out, sold us down the river. Of course, now I think he's kind of one of them that's really proving that there's a lot of continuity in that regard between administrations, but that was what his platform was built on. That was offensive and provocative to the ruling class in power, so much so that they tried to take him down through farces like Russiagate and the Jan 6 insurrection hoax, calling that an insurrection, and things like that. They tried to take him out for that, for being offensive and provocative. Well, now the shoe's on the other foot here when Trump's in power, saying the same sorts of things in the same direction as those that opposed Trump when he was a candidate.
But you're also allowed to say, I just think America is inherently evil. I think it's an evil project. It began with an act of genocide against American Indians. And ever since, it has been imperialistic and spread war. Martin Luther King in 1968, in a speech that he gave about opposing the Vietnam War, said that the United States is the single greatest conveyor of violence anywhere in the world. Is that a statement of contempt and hostility against our nation? Yes, it is. It's saying what the United States is doing in the world is something that deserves contempt.
Yeah, that's legal to say, by the way. That's an expression of speech. Now, King wasn't right because there was a guy around that time, Mao Zedong, conducting the Cultural Revolution in China, killing multitudes, many millions of people. That was a pretty big purveyor of violence on the world stage at that time. But we'll leave that aside because what Martin Luther King said was legal. You're allowed to say that your own government is the biggest purveyor of violence on the planet. I'll say it right now. My government is the biggest purveyor of violence on the planet, especially in tandem with Israel right now. So that is just what I think. That's legal and that's American.
But Trump's movement has been based on that. The United States has become this Marxist nation with cultural decay. These are all expressions of contempt against the United States. And even if the burning of the American flag sends a different message, it's still a message. It's a political message. And therefore, no matter how uniquely provocative it is, it's still a protected mode of expression by the First Amendment, as justices on the Supreme Court across the political spectrum have repeatedly said, including probably the most popular right-wing judge on the Supreme Court in 5 decades, Antonin Scalia.
Yeah, no doubt. I want to drive that last point home. Okay, so it's not just the fact that the Supreme Court stands against this and has passed precedents in favor of the idea that flag burning is protected speech. It's part of the American expression of speech. Those inherent rights that we traditionally have is represented by flag burning. That is a precedent that the Supreme Court has established. But if the Supreme Court was against that, I would still believe that. The Supreme Court has gotten it wrong. So it's not that the Supreme Court is saying that innately, that I believe that. I'll just give a few examples. In Korematsu versus the United States, the Supreme Court decided that the president has unilateral authority to gather up people based on their lineage and put them in concentration camps. That's what FDR did to the Japanese Americans during World War II. In Wickard versus Filburn, they said you can't grow a surplus of grain on your own property and consume it because that would be violating the Commerce Clause, violating what would be the markets that are existing. If you didn't do that, you're impacting the market too much, so you can't grow a surplus of grain on your own property and consume it. This was during the Great Depression. There were a lot of controls on crops, forced destruction of large portions of crops, etc. In the Dred Scott decision, the Supreme Court said that blacks, regardless of whether they're freed or slaves, don't have American citizenship. And that just falsely was true, regardless of what you might think about the question in the era. That wasn't true. In many places, blacks were citizens and were freed. But the Supreme Court got that wrong even back then. So those are just 3 examples where the Supreme Court gets it wrong. So it's not that the Supreme Court just innately has this aura of genius. It's just that it's true. The First Amendment is supposed to prohibit Congress from ever interfering with the rights of the people to speak freely. Many of the American states have bills of rights that say the same. have the same prohibitions on that state level authority from infringing on the same. But beyond that, like I said earlier, this is a clear usurpation of legislative power vested in Congress. How do I know that? The Constitution says that in Article 1, Section 1. And does Congress, in its enumerated list of powers in Article 1, Section 8, even have the power to curtail flag burning, ban it, prohibit it, etc.? No, it doesn't. And in fact, the First Amendment shields us from being prosecuted for that. So not only is this wrong from just a structural vantage point, the fact that only Congress can legislate, Trump is violating, one of the most sacred safeguards of liberty inherent in the First Amendment. And like I said, the First Amendment is part of the Bill of Rights, and it really should be called the Bill of Limitations because it was designed to be limitations on the government's power. It wasn't supposed to be a positive right, and it wasn't supposed to be read that way. And the 10th Amendment, by the way, says that all rights not clearly delegated to Congress are to be controlled by the American people, the states, and the people. So what I think the best avenue here is for the states to stand up. If the feds won't deal with this, and maybe they will, the states should nullify this. Actively interfere with agents of the states, marshals, whoever Trump or any future administration sends to try to enforce this, they should nullify it. Use your own state-level law enforcement to interfere with the feds. This was what was done in the 1850s to interfere with enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act, because slaves went up north to various, places in the area, and you had states like Michigan and Massachusetts and Wisconsin actively interfering with the feds not returning fugitive slaves. The same strategy should be used to thwart this stupid flag-burning mandate, this edict that Trump signed as if he was some emperor. So that's where we're at. That's what I think. And that's what needs to be done. But I do want to hear from you. Is Glenn Greenwald right about this? How should people interfere with this? Do you think that this is going to get overturned on a federal level? How big of an encroachment is this on free speech? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and please subscribe to Glenn Greenwald too. And if you would, please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. If you do that, you can help support the channel. I graciously appreciate that, even tip my hat to you. And in return, I'll give you access to all of my members only videos before they go live to the general public on my channel. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.